Welcome to this episode of the Ohio Lodge of Research podcast, OLR Connections. This time I sit down with Right Worshipful Brother Alex Herbert and Worshipful Brother Don Crews, both past masters of the Ohio Lodge of Research, as well as brothers who have authored their own books on Masonic topics. In this episode, they discuss their process for research and writing and publication to help shed light on these processes for anyone who might be interested. All right, well, let's start with just a brief history from each of you of kind of how you got into Masonry, how the path that you've taken and so forth.
I joined Freemasonry in 2008. It was my senior year of undergrad at Ohio University. And to be honest, I joined because I was bored. It was my last year of undergrad. I was getting ready to move home, but at the same time, I wanted to get involved in something more than just like the college lifestyle. But at the same time, I also didn't want to get involved in something and then have to leave it in 6 months when I left. I'd had some chance dealings with Paramuthia Lodge number 25 down there. And I think on my second attempt, my email got through and one thing led to another. Actually, Jeff Slattery, our treasurer at Ohio Lodge of Research, was the gentleman who first met with me when I put in it was before the inquiry process, but when I put in my inquiry. And then I unfortunately did not have the chance to run into Chad. I left before Chad came to town, but connected with him many years later. Moved back home to Northeastern Ohio, joined Hudson Lodge number 510. Worked my way up to master, served 3 years as worshipful master of that lodge. Served as worshipful master of the Ohio Lodge of Research, went on to be a district education officer, went on to be a district deputy grand master for a year. And I'm currently the master of Castle Island Virtual Lodge number 190 under the Grand Lodge of Manitoba, which I'm actually going to sit in lodge physically for the first time in that lodge as master and period on Thursday. So I'm very much looking forward to that.
So I joined the Order of DMLA when I was 14 years old, long time ago, 1973. God, it's hard to believe it's that long ago. One of those, chance meeting somebody who was involved with it. DMLA was the center of my social life in high school. Where I grew up in Virginia. We would go all sorts of places. And one of the best things about it was we had one DMLA chapter and 3 Job's Daughters Bethels in the vicinity. There was never a weekend without something to do. So that was a very positive experience. When I went to the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy for my undergraduate degree, we at least my freshman year, we still had a DMLA club. After that, we couldn't find an advisor who was a master mason who would sponsor the club. So it sort of petered out after that. But we would go and do installation, do Arch of Swords for installations, officers, and those sort of things. One thing and another, it wasn't until I moved to New Jersey in my career, I'd gone to see when I came back. I petitioned a lodge where I knew absolutely no one. Took a long time for that to actually come through. It was at the time it was Gavel Lodge. It became Gavel Washington Lodge. And by the time all that happened, I got my EA and my fellowcraft degree and and then moved to Boston. From Boston, I went back to New Jersey for a short while, but turned around and came to Cincinnati. So that was in 1988. I walked into the temple. I'd literally been in Cincinnati for all of 3 days, and I walked into the big temple downtown. And I told them, I'm a sojourning Mason from New Jersey. Didn't get another word out of them. I said, there's only one lodge you can join, or you can go visit. You need to go see the guys at Noah's History of Harmony, number 2. They were originally from New Jersey, which I did. Was accepted a little over a year after I started attending. The shock of shocks, the night I was made a member, I also became a steward, which would have been 1989. Would be serve as master in first in the term in 1995, then again in 1998, 1999. Dave, as I know, you know, I'm extremely involved in York Rite Masonry. I'm a past high priest. I'm a KYCH, so I'm a past high priest, half illustrious master, and past commander, and involved in innumerable other bodies. And of course, the Lodge of Research, I joined in 2015, right after my book was published. I actually joined the Lodge of Research, and on my first meeting was made an active member of the Lodge of Research. So that kind of brings us up to date.
Don, when were you the master of the Ohio Lodge of Research? Do you
I
remember?
was master in 17 and 18, 2 years.
18. And Alex, when were you?
I want to say 21 and 22, because I think I wrapped up my term just before I moved to Denver in 22.
Okay. Okay. So you were only a few years apart. A
few years and a pandemic apart.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about that. So what made you want to get involved in the Ohio Lodge of Research?
Okay, well, amongst our Randy Clark, because my dear friend was already involved with it, and Chad had been very helpful to me when I was working on my book. He got me in to dig through some of the files at Grand Lodge, et cetera, and also getting introductions to a few people around the state who had some additional things. So, and of course,
that was Chad Simpson.
Chad correct? Simpson, that is correct. Chad was master of the Lodge of Research when I joined in 2015. So it was one of those sort of things that's sort of obvious with the book. You know, the book sort of led to the Lodge of Research, rather than the other way around.
There was a significant change in the behavior of the Ohio Lodge of Research that happened right around 2018, 2019, which of course led into the pandemic and how we operated. And so, Alex, your experience may have been quite a bit different just because you came in later than that, or you got involved as a master later than that. So, how would you answer that question?
So I got involved in the Ohio Lodge of Research in 2018, like right, I think when that change in character started, that resurgence really started. For me, it was a kind of a turning point in my time as a Mason, where I had just wrapped up my third term as worshipful master. I was done with the administration side, so I thought. I still enjoyed ritual, but I was getting kind of burnt out on that side. I had just been appointed to my first term as a district education officer and took to this new role with gusto. So before long, I was developing little like 5 to 10 minute talks on all kinds of topics just to have something in my back pocket. And when I visit a lodge, they would typically call on me to share something, whether I want to or not. So I'd already started doing some low level, not just research, but writing. And then I got connected with Chad Kapinski, the other Chad, through a research project I was doing for the ritual committee on basically world religions and accommodating candidates of all different faiths in our ritual. And Chad was incredibly encouraging. And I guess through that new friendship, I got pulled into the Ohio Lodge of Research, and one thing led to another, and we were off to the races.
Very good. And like most lodges, if you show interest, you become an officer eventually.
Yeah, I think I became a senior warden almost immediately, and then moved right into my term as master from there.
When I mentioned that the two of you had both written books, in my mind, I was thinking the Lodge Liberté, but you effectively wrote a book prior to that, which it was more of a, maybe you would call it a pamphlet. I would call it a small book, maybe.
Yes, maybe not as exhaustive, but.
Yeah, but that was the one you just referenced with this world religions and so forth. So how did that project come about?
So it got started with, I had attended a degree for a brother in a sister lodge of mine up in northeastern Ohio who was Muslim. And the worshipful master and the past masters honestly didn't know how to address that in his degree, because despite the fact that Freemasonry tries very hard to be non-sectarian, there are still a lot of very overt Judeo-Christian references in the ritual that for a Muslim or for a candidate of a different faith might not ring true, or might even subtract from his experience of the degree. He doesn't feel maybe as connected to it as he would if it was a little more personal. So I had reached out to the chairman of the ritual committee just to see what we could do. And I had found some resources from other Grand Lodges online, and he encouraged me to continue research and to actually build a body of reference and then come back to the ritual committee and basically report on what I found. And again, one thing led to another, and I ended up with this, maybe it is rather exhaustive body of research looking at, at this point, because I keep working on it, I'd say upwards of a dozen different faiths. They have communities in and around Ohio that we might come into contact with, involving not just like a literature review, but actually reaching out and getting involved in some of these communities directly, attending services, speaking to both practitioners and clergy, and really trying to not just understand how Freemasonry can better serve these communities, but just to understand these communities better myself. It became just an absolutely transformative experience for me.
Very good. Very good. Yeah. And so that was, I know that was incorporated into the process of the Royal Schofield Society. And
It
it's
was
also, is it an official document of the Grand Lodge of Ohio now as well?
It is. So you can find it on Grandview. And
Yeah.
yes, it was pulled into the Royal Schofield Society and actually served as my masterpiece for the Royal Schofield Society.
Yeah.
Because at the time, I didn't know how I could possibly top that, which every time you think you hit a peak, there's another one on the horizon, I guess.
Right. Yeah. Now that has not been published anywhere other than Grand Lodge of Ohio at this point, correct?
No, several other Grand Lodges have referenced it. It's been
Right.
passed around, but it's still mostly focused on Ohio Freemasonry, and it's a Grand Lodge of Ohio publication.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Now, the other book that you wrote, I think my understanding, I kind of remember the process. It was almost like a passion project, if I remember it. I think I remember the first conversation where you were just excited that you had found this, and then I watched it grow from this excitement to the paper, to the book, and so forth. But you can probably expand on that better than I can. How did that one come about?
Well, that one started with a Wikipedia article. So I've always been drawn to history. I'm a chemist, I'm an engineer by trade, but I always dig into the history behind whatever it is that I'm doing, as you can see by the bookcases behind me. And Freemasonry is absolutely no exception to that. So one night during one of these late night Wikipedia delves, I came across a story of a lodge that was formed in a concentration camp, which struck me as being an incredibly poignant story. But the way that I am, when I find something like that, I immediately dig into like the sources, because I'm not content to have stories regurgitated to me, especially not on Wikipedia. I want to read the actual firsthand accounts. So reference to reference to reference, and eventually track down, well, I guess one of these shelves is pretty much everything that I accumulated over that period of time, but got to firsthand accounts from survivors of the event, their personal letters, their memoirs, books that have been written about them. And like you mentioned, it was quite an evolution. It started as a lodge education program, maybe about 5 minutes long. It grew into, I think, one of my first papers for the Ohio Lodge of Research, not the first one, then the second one. But before long, I had so much that, the book is like 110 pages. Like, it's way too large for a paper. It's way too large to be published in the journal. And I did not really want this story to get lost. So one thing led to another, as I keep saying. And the research itself kind of pushed me in the direction of publishing it formally as a book.
Very good. Very good. Now, Don, I think your story is a little bit different. Your book is about effectively Masonry in Cincinnati. So the first question is, how does a New Jersey Mason get excited about Masonry in Cincinnati? But how did that book come about? How did that idea come about for you?
Well, I realized that New Jersey's actually was only just because of where I lived. It wasn't because I was I'm particularly bound to New Jersey, though. Of course, I married a Jersey girl. But when I was working for the public library, my next to last career, I was a public librarian, And I did a lot with public programming. And as Alex said, much like Alex, I'm at heart a historian. The famous quotation, I know no way to judge the future, but by the past, is certainly amongst my mottos. And Arcadia Publishing is the largest publisher of local histories in the world. So I had a number of friends. Probably the closest one, or probably the person who was most helpful to me, is a guy named Kevin Grace. Kevin was the head of the archives at UC. Dave, you remember he hosted us back in 2018 when I was master at the archives at UC. Kevin, I believe, wrote 8 or 12 of these books. I had essentially 6 months to write the book. And one thing that's kind of interesting that happened while I'm doing it is I had this idea, because I knew what Nova's History of Harmony had in its archives, which I had utter and complete access to. I didn't know what anybody else had. I mean, I knew what odds or ends. But then I started asking, and it was very funny. One of the things I found was very unusual. And again, if anybody tries to do this again, to repeat this process on masonry or any other topic, I discovered that the people I thought were going to help me did very little for me. Not going to say nothing, but very little. And people I'd never known came out of the woodwork. Rich Dickershide, past Grand Master, but at the time a district deputy, would stand up at the First Masonic District Officers Association meeting several times in my absence and said, "Hey, there's this guy who's writing a book on masonry. If anybody's got something, reach out to him." And people would call me out of the blue and say, "Hey, I'm the LEO, or I'm past master in 1957. And, best example I can think of is Yateman Lodge in Mount Washington in the east end of Cincinnati. Guy goes, "You want to go dig through and Alex, this probably you'll appreciate, Dave. I think you'd appreciate it too. You want to go dig through our vault?" Of course, to me, that's okay. That's a holiday. Let's go. When can I get there? So I was very lucky that those things, but that also, as I'm sure you can guess, that affected exactly how I ended up telling the story. So that's kind of that's a long answer to your basic question, but yeah, it was an adventure of what I would come across, and that sort of started. So it was a continual learning process for me of stuff I'd never seen, never heard of, and some things I wanted to do.
So as Don was talking about how you just kept finding more and more information, Alex, you became a bobblehead there. Did you want to add anything to that?
No, he's exactly right. And that was honestly one of the biggest hurdles I had to overcome to actually publish, was that every time I was about to pull the trigger, I would find some new document, some new trove of information that I would have to incorporate, which then led to reformatting everything and kind of restart the process from there. And it actually wasn't until I think I hit like a 3-month stretch of not finding any new information, I thought it was safe to finally quickly push the first draft out the door. And sure enough, as soon as I did, I found something that I wish I had managed to work in. But that unfortunately is the way it goes with print media.
Yeah, there's always a risk of something like that. Yeah. So, Alex, how long do you think, how long of a time frame would you put on the actual writing process for the book? Not the whole, crazy idea LEO program, but when you actually decided, I'm going to write a book.
I want to say that took probably 2 years.
Okay.
From the time when I actually had the paper, which kind of formed the bones of it, like that first Ohio Lodge research paper, to having an actual workable draft that was about ready to get published, I would put it about 2 years. So 2018 to right before the pandemic in 2020.
Okay. And Don, you said you were actually, you had 6 months from when you signed the contract, but you had actually been writing or been thinking about it for a couple years prior to that, right?
Probably, I literally think I've been thinking about it for 5 years.
Okay.
And then I signed a contract in the middle of November, and I had to have everything to them, the pictures, the copy, etc., all to them by March, so that they might return the galleys, so they could get galleys to me. I could return the galleys in April. And then it came out literally a week and a half before Grand Lodge in 2014.
Yeah, kind of the point. I mean, that's kind of what I expected, but kind of the point that I wanted to hopefully get across is that I think a lot of people who have never done anything like this, they don't realize that, there's years of thought and planning and research and whatever that goes into it.
Well, there's years of thought, of planning, of research. There's the process of actually, I don't know if anyone actually puts pen to paper anymore, but putting finger to keyboard. But to be honest, for me, a lot of the work came into play with everything that came after that. So I self-published. So I was handling everything from typesetting and page formatting to designing the cover to I handled pretty much the entire workload to churn out the final product. And I am a little bit obsessive when it comes to formatting. So that was a major hurdle in and of itself to overcome. And to be honest, one of the other than accumulating the actual research material itself, probably the next biggest hurdle was actually I try to include as many images in the book as possible. Because I like writing, I like speaking, but giving someone something to actually look at. In particular, I tried to find portraits or photographs or some images of all the major figures in the story itself. So when you read about someone, you can actually form a mental image, which led to an entirely different rabbit hunt of finding all of these photographs, trying to get permissions to reprint them in a book, which took a lot of time and actually a lot of personal expense just to secure all of that before I went to print.
Yeah. Would you self-publish again?
I would. I really enjoyed the experience, and to be honest, there were two reasons why I self-published. The first was that I think we all suffer a little bit from imposter syndrome. So when I had the final product in hands, I was a little worried that I would give this to a publisher and they would tear it apart. So self-publishing was a route around, catastrophic critique, but also I can be a little bit of a control freak when it comes to documentation. I wanted everything exactly the way that I wanted it, the right size, the right shape, the right texture on the cover of the book, and self-publishing was the only way I could really guarantee that I would be satisfied with my own final product. But I learned a heck of a lot just through that process, beyond the research, beyond masonry, just the process of actually publishing a book that was incredibly rewarding. Yeah, I would do it again in a heartbeat.
Okay. Okay. So I'm sure that if we were to sit down and compare exact notes between the two of you, even though you had a similar process, it would be quite different. If someone came up to you with this idea that they think would be a great book, again, regardless of whether it's Masonic or otherwise, but they have this book idea, how would you recommend or encourage them to begin and carry out that process?
Let you take that one first, Don.
Okay. Well, I mean, obviously, if they knew they had a lot of pictures, it was a story that could be told with pictures. This Arcadia system is remarkably helpful. It's kind of the franchise of book writing. I was thinking when Alex was describing his process, I literally when after they where I was in, I think it was before I signed the contract, they sent me a workbook, literally a physical workbook. But sometimes also then, you go on a search for something to try to find it. So certainly if this is the format that you want, I would certainly say go into that. And it's interesting, when John Bisak reviewed my book in the Masonic Society magazine, he said, perhaps this is, an excellent model for what people could do to collect their local Masonic history, which the three of us are all too well aware is disappearing quickly, slowly, and then quickly.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head when you mentioned the need for a system, because going into this, I very quickly, I think, got a little bit out of my element, just all of the sources and all of the information that I was collecting, and finding the information was the first step. Organizing the information was perhaps the more difficult thing. So I can't tell you how many times I would come across a reference or a description, and it would trigger some memory in my head of another source that I had already found, but then I couldn't go back and find it anywhere. Like, I was at that point, I was not organized enough. So the discipline of actually not just collecting, either acquiring or making copies of all the sources that you need, but also coming up with a system, whether it's something standardized or whether it's something of your own making that at least you understand, where you can find and recall this information easily. Because I lost weeks or months of my life trying to track down things that I had already known and already found, but just couldn't, pull out of the maze of things that I had accumulated at that point. I would say the other thing that I would recommend to anyone approaching writing and publishing a book is the benefit of contemporaneous notes. So I started sleeping with a notepad on my nightstand. I started walking around with a little notepad in my pocket because I very quickly realized, like, I could be anywhere. I could be looking at a can of beans on the supermarket shelf and suddenly come up with the perfect turn of phrase or the some new connection that I hadn't made before then. And I knew that if I didn't write it down that moment, either I would obsess over it until I could actually get home, or it would actually like fly out of my head and I would be grasping for it again for many nights to come. So I think those would be the two biggest recommendations I would make to anyone approaching research from a serious perspective as an amateur. There's nothing, I have to like caution, there's nothing wrong with this, but I love my book. It was definitely a passion project. I'm very proud of what I was able to accomplish through it. In many ways, it still embarrasses me because I still, I don't know, I still find things that I wish I could do differently or that I could fix. It's never perfect. And that's the other thing you kind of have to push beyond. You will love what you come up with, but it will never be perfect. It will never completely satisfy you.
Isn't it better to have those few little mistakes and have this information out there? I mean, one of the things in looking at my book, the number of Masonic buildings that have even been knocked down since I wrote this. Mm-hmm. My timing was impeccable for catching things before they disappeared. Oakley Lodge, the buildings, their lodge they had actually in Oakley is long gone. They've sold the property. There's an apartment building on it. If I hadn't caught that when I did, I would have no record of it. There's probably brothers, especially, will come past us in Cincinnati, who will never know that lodge existed as it did then and there. Mm-hmm. And so I would rather risk that there might be, I say 1947, it was 1948, that somebody's name was Hall and I called in Hill. That's all stuff that can be corrected, and it kind of gives some fun stories while you're doing it. But perfection, what is it? Perfect or great? What is perfect is the enemy of good.
So one of the things that I learned, I guess, through this research project, that history can be lost in many different ways. It can be, in my case, what was really annoying me was that history was actually being overwritten by this new myth that I felt the need to tamp down on a little bit. It can be destroyed. We have lodges lost to fire all the time, and they take their records and all their artifacts with them. And perhaps the saddest is when it's just simply forgotten. There's this anecdote that gets passed around, and I'm going to commit the same sin that I've been railing against because I don't know what the source of this is, and I'm going to repeat it anyway. I've heard it as a Native American saying. I've heard it as like a traditional Mexican saying. I've heard it attributed to all kinds of different things, and it's the concept of, I think it's the 4 deaths, where a man will die 4 deaths over the course of time. Like the first death is the day that you're born, because that's the beginning of the end. The second death is the day that you actually die. The third death is the day that you're buried and everyone else kind of moves on. And then the fourth death, the saddest death, is the day that your name is repeated aloud for the last time, because after that you're forgotten, and that's truly the end. And in the case of the story that I was chasing down, unfortunately, by the time I got around to publishing, all of the survivors, all the principal actors in my story had passed on in the years preceding. I never had the chance to meet them. There were some jurisdictional issues, so I would never have been able to like sit and watch with them anyway, but just to never even have the chance to talk with them in person was quite saddening. And as they have passed on, the story had been picked up by other historians here and there, mostly in Europe, and continued on. And someone needs to pick up the baton, pick up a torch, and move it on to the next generation. Otherwise, these are the stories that will get lost, and that would be a true tragedy.
Yeah.
we need to capture these. And again, going back to what I said before, an imperfect part of their story would be far better than saying it's got to be perfect.
So what did it, so you get through all this process, all the pain, the agony. What was that? Can you describe that feeling when you held the first printed copy in your hands?
Coolest thing ever.
Yeah, so I think I actually have my very first proof. I know have my very first proof on the bookshelf behind me somewhere because it actually came with like the pre-publication watermark on it to make sure I couldn't just hawk it on the side.
Right.
And I remember I had come home from work and it had been dropped off in an envelope on the front porch. And it came, I want to say it actually came a couple days early, so I wasn't expecting it. I thought it was one of the other like 10,000 books that I order on a regular basis. So I rip it open and this thing falls out. I'm pretty sure I actually started crying on like the front porch of my house because it was real. Like all like years of effort, all the blood, sweat, and tears of getting this thing out the door, late nights grappling with formatting programs and calls to Belgium because rights hadn't been secured correctly on one thing or another. Like all of this stress, and now it's done. Now it's real, and I don't know if I will ever have another moment like that. I will have good moments, but I don't know if I'll have another one like that.